When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite, looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, their profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, Beyond the Headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today.
Hey there, I'm Susie Singer-Carter, and I'm writer, director, producer, and I think you ought to listen to Crazy Train Radio.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we are certainly going to be talking about a serious topic, but also try to have a little fun and educate everybody. And I guess we could say the best way to put this is with the education, it's a documentary, which people know I'm fascinated with. And the documentary is called No Country for Old People, a documentary that everybody certainly needs to see. And it is, I should say, this was written and directed by Susie Singer-Carter. Miss Carter, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? How are you?
I can't complain. Likewise.
Yeah.
So, I found it intriguing when I first read the email about this. But, because we all at some point know somebody who goes into things like nursing homes and everything down at rehab centers and, just everything along that line. But correct me if I'm wrong, but you had personal experience with this because of your mother and Alzheimer's, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes. And I'll add to what you said is that I think all of us know somebody, and almost all of us will sometime experience it in our lives, whether it's acute care or some kind of longer term care. And so that's why I felt it was important to do a documentary, because this is the thing that's going to touch everybody.
Absolutely. And would you say it was, and correct again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but with your mother's specific story, and it was mom didn't seem like her normal self, even with the Alzheimer's, but there was different things, uh, like that stood out for me. I heard in a different conversation. She had an issue with sores, somebody else's bridge in, and it seemed like she might not have been bathed or anything like that in one particular time period.
Right. Yeah, that came out of COVID. And that, COVID really was it really was the catalyst for understanding for a lot of people what has been going on behind closed doors in our long-term care system for decades. And with my mom, because I wasn't able to see her on a regular basis, what that scene that you're referring to, when I went to visit my mom and I noticed that she was not the same person in little subtle ways that no one else would probably notice, except for someone else's bridge in her mouth, of course, which was, very, very emblematic of the understaffing and the kind of chaos that was going on during COVID, or the exasperated understaffing, I should say, because understaffing is part of the business model of our long-term care system. So yeah, I did notice all those things. And during COVID, the facilities had a sense of relaxation because the family members weren't allowed to come in and check in on their family, on their loved ones. So we weren't there, and we were at their mercy to say, how is my, husband, wife, mom, father? And we really didn't know. We didn't know how they were for over a year.
So some of the statistics that are known, if you do some digging, it's something like 75% of the nursing homes have inadequate staffing before the pandemic, and now can be worse. Average nursing homes and facilities are really a multi-million dollar business. And something like 12-hour shifts for certain staff members, and CNAS work only 8 hours, which means the average attention to family members range from 8 minutes to 25 minutes, depending on the amount of people in the facilities and things like that, depending on the job as well. But was it your mom's situation that you really started questioning what the system was all about?
Indeed. Yes. And just for your listeners, the CNAs are your nurses assistants, and they're really your frontline workers. They're the ones that work, regularly with the people that are the residents, really. Right. So the CNAs are also victims of the system because they're not able to care for their patients and the way that they would want to be able to. They're not given the time. They're not given the pay that they deserve. They're not given any benefits. So they're overworked, and they often walk away with what's called moral injury because they know they can't do the job that they should be doing. And so they go home and they feel so awful and depressed, and many of them are leaving the industry. So that even exasperates the understaffing situation because we can't get good people to stay in these jobs. So have become a side gig, which is the last thing you want, is for someone who is just taking on this as a side gig for someone's quality of life or their life, right? So so what, let me see. What did you ask me? I just went off on a tangent on the
No, it's
CNAs.
fine.
Yeah.
No,
What
I
did,
was just mentioning about how the depending on what staff members are, where they at and what they do,
right, right, right.
that averages out to very little time per patient or
Very
resident and
little
such.
time. Very little time. Many CNAs have, up to 30 residents that they must care for in an 8-hour shift. So you do the math. That's not a lot of time to toilet somebody, change somebody, bathe somebody, feed somebody. And let's not forget, these are human beings that need social interaction. They're not widgets. We're not widgets. If you treated a dog like that, they would not thrive. And our loved ones, ourselves, we can't thrive in those kinds of situations. It's more than just, being fed, which doesn't often happen as well. I mean, there's horrible stories of people starving to death. My mother was, every single time she went into the hospital, she was massively dehydrated. And that's what caused all these issues. Dehydration is one of the biggest problems because they don't have time to make sure people are hydrated. The very simple things in life, right? So, if you can only imagine what it's like to be thirsty when you're super thirsty, can you imagine days of being super thirsty, weeks, months? It's awful. It's torture.
Well, this particular documentary, I would say, is a nursing home expose and also being a cautionary tale and a public rally for change. It was a finalist for Health Awareness Film, Video, Television, or Show in the fourth annual Anthem Awards. But specifically, as we kind of hinted at in the with my first question, but it chronicles the last 6 months of your mom's life in a five-star home and discovers the system designed to protect our most vulnerable. But sometimes these places are run by venture capitalists and real estate investment trusts, and you do see some greed cost that has cost millions to be not treated the best, as Susie is saying here,
Mhm.
and the consequences can be dire and even lead to death. And unfortunately, the public don't know about this sometimes until it's too late. So, with all that being said, when do you think the greed of the business side really starts taking hold from the research and everything you've done?
Right. Sadly, it's been going on for over 5 decades. And I actually I read passages at the end of the documentary from a book that was written in 1974. And when I read the passages, you would think that I'm doing a recap of the documentary, but indeed I'm not. It's coming out of this book. And so that's the sad part, is that because there's a lot of reasons, but in particular, ageism and ableism and the way our corporate structures are set up and our corporate entities are protected. There's no transparency. It's been, the perfect storm to be able to take advantage of the long-term care system and financially. And so that's the problem, is that it's just the perfect storm. And until we can change the way we look at people who are disabled, who are vulnerable, who are elderly, and the public really takes charge of that and really demands transparency in who is owning the ownerships, and some accountability for all of these things, because the accountability is just not there. And even the rare fines that are given out, they're the cost of doing business for these companies. It's just going to take the public, and that's what we're hoping, that this film motivates that. It motivates people to say, wow, I didn't know, like me, basically just saying, wow, I did not know this was happening, and this is not right. And it's also, just I want to remind your listeners that it's not only about, if you don't want to think about the neglect and the abuse that goes on. It's really your money that comes out of your taxes that goes to pay for these programs, Medicare, Medicaid. And so if it's not helping the people you love or yourself, and it's paying for someone else's house or private jet, that should make you angry enough to want to make a change.
Yeah. And which leads to what I was just about to ask. And there are times and certain places. I'm not saying everybody or everything, but there are claims that some of these facilities and such claim to be underfunded, where owners of these facilities live in multi-million dollar homes. And there's also money laundering in some of these places where there's at least $1 billion Medicare fraud and laundering scheme and all. But when did you start learning about some of these things when it comes to the money side of the business?
Right. Well, I was very fortunate to meet a retiring federal prosecutor named Rick Montcastle, who is my partner. And Rick Montcastle you might be aware of him if you watched the miniseries Dope Sick on Hulu, because he was played by Peter Sarsgaard, and Rick was the lead prosecutor against Purdue Pharma, who were responsible. They're the manufacturers of OxyContin and responsible for, really the OxyContin crisis. And he went up against them with his partner, Randy Reismeyer. And I had him on my podcast, Love Conquers Alls, because on the last episode, Rick's partner says to him, I know what our next case is, and it's a case against Abbott Labs. It's another pharmaceutical, and they're off marketing Depakote to nursing homes. And Depakote is a drug that is designed for people with seizures. It's an anti-seizure drug, but it made people with Alzheimer's and dementia and elderly, chemically restrained. And that's what happened to my mother. And my mother went from this vibrant, physically healthy woman to immobile and incontinent until I found out that they were giving her Depakote. So Rick really knows. And so Rick actually prosecuted them. It was one of the biggest cases, a $1.5 billion, judgment against Abbott Labs. And he also, I found out that he had also prosecuted nursing homes for over 2 decades. And although he won these individual cases, he never saw any change. And he was the one that told me, this is not just your problem. This is a systemic issue nationally. And it is not going to stop until we take charge of it as a community. And he knew all of the financials and what was going on. And then, of course, interviewing people like Ernest Tosh, who is a lawyer from Texas, who has done all of the forensic studying of the financial kind of model, which is nothing, of these places. And he says in our documentary, it's criminal enterprise. And he's seen it before, and this is exactly what it is. And he speaks at Congress all the time. He's a very loud voice for transparency, along with other experts. Everyone, it's sort of the dirty little secret, which is what I call this documentary. It's really the dirty little secret.
So, obviously, from what I understand, you're a mom yourself, and you saw how this stuff was happening with your mother. So, would you say that led to a difficult conversation with your child or children to potentially how you wish to be cared for in that type of state?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's kind of been an unspoken conversation, to be honest, because what happened to my mom happened 2 years ago. And we were Team Norma. That's my mom's name, for quite a while. And then when she passed away, I I hit the ground running with this documentary, and certainly I think we haven't really sat down and had the conversation, but I think that my feelings are very I'm transparent about how I feel. I mean, my partner Rick Moncastle, I mean, we both agree that none of us want to end up in a long-term care facility the way they are now. Nobody does. Even with family, like I was there advocating for my mom. I ended up having to do it every single day for 6 months. And I could not save her from the neglect. So no, I would never want to be in one of those places the way they are now. And that's not to throw everybody under the bus, that there aren't some good places out in our country. I know there are, but they're not enough. They're the minority. And I believe that most of the people that work at these places want to do a good job. They're just not given the tools to do so.
And one of the biggest things I noticed about this topic, at least, was the disregarding of medical directives.
Mm-hmm.
And is that because of it's all about the money for them, or how would you describe that particular part of the problem there?
Well, every part of this problem, like my partner says, and I have to quote him because he's brilliant, and it's such a simple statement and we all know it. It's follow the money. Every single issue is follow the money, right? So, I mean, every motivation is driven by money. If someone, directives, people don't have time. It's like they don't have time. They don't look at it. People don't even know if your family, often if you go, and this doesn't have to do with long-term care, but listen, this kind of situation trickles into all parts of our healthcare system. So when my mom was in emergency room, nobody looked to see that she had Alzheimer's. They didn't even know. They're just working and doing. It becomes one size fits all. And they don't know the individual's baseline. Maybe this is maybe they don't articulate verbally, right? Because they have dementia, but that doesn't mean they don't understand. So, or they can't be, communicated with. So but because of that, they make assumptions. And that's where I talk about the ableism, because it becomes a stigma to have anything that is, any kind of cognitive disability becomes a stigma. So, and yes, it's all motivated by money, because time is money, resources are money, on and on and on. So that's why, right? And so the directive, so you might say, I might have said, I don't want my mom to be intubated anymore. Well, it's faster and easier for them to just intubate her and not worry about it. Let's just intubate her. That way she won't die. And it won't be on us. We're not going to get dinged for a death.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And not to look at her records and say, oh, if we intubate her, she's already been intubated 2 times before in the past 2 months. And that's very difficult on you or me. Right. I mean, if I had any of us that were intubated, it's so invasive and so hard. Like, you would not be able to speak for a while. You would not be able to swallow very well. It takes rehab to get everything back in there. One of the lawyers, like I mentioned, Ernest Tosh, he was intubated. We talked about this when I was interviewing him. He was intubated for something that he was going through health-wise, and he said they had to knock him out because it was so uncomfortable. He tried to rip it out 1,000 times. Like, it is awful. And afterwards, he said it took a very long time for him to rehabilitate. And he's a young guy. He's in his late 40s, maybe 50, and he said it is awful. So when you think about someone who is much more frail and you just doing one size fits all against a directive, there's a reason why there's directives. There's a reason. And so those need to be respected. And often, like with my mom, it's not just a desire. It is it's a health thing. It's a health requirement, and they must look at it because no one knows our loved ones or ourselves better than us. And so
You would think.
You would think, right. So that's the problem. And again, not to say that that ER doctor isn't trying to do his best, but he doesn't have the help. There might be one ER doctor and, 30 patients who have come in. And that's where things like ageism come into play because, well, you've got a baby who's suffering here, and then you've got an 89-year-old woman who where's your priority? Now, if you were staffed properly, then you wouldn't have to make a choice.
Mhm. I guess another slap in the face when we talk about this, and not just this topic, but healthcare in a whole,
Mhm.
is that workers are being told to keep quiet about issues within the system and systems.
Mhm.
So, in particular, with your mom's case, were you aware or found out after the fact about them being told, employees, I mean, to be quiet about mom's case and cases around your mom?
Not particularly my mom's case because what happens is, as you probably know, because you see, you've done your research very, very well. There's retaliation. And so, often what happens is when people that are working at these facilities, they have to abide by the culture of that particular facility. And if they're not doing what their superiors want, then they're going to the backlash is going to roll down to them, right? So if they haven't quit by now, they've pretty much been proselytized into that culture. And so, which is survival, right? It's like Stockholm syndrome. You start thinking, well, I'm doing the best I can, and these people, this daughter or that husband or that wife is really a pain in my butt, and I'm doing the best I can, and now they're annoying me, and I'm not gonna deal with them the way they want me to. In fact, I'm gonna do the opposite because it's the only control they have, right? And so most people that are still working in the facility aren't really gonna be that transparent with you to say, you know what, da 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 da. I really saw this and it shouldn't be happening. But I will say that maybe not intentionally, but it did happen in this way, that when my mom came back from the hospital with her stage 4 pressure sore, and the facility had said it didn't happen there. Of course, it happened there. Where else could it have happened? That's where she lives, right? So, but the charge nurse at the nursing home, when my mom came back, stopped me and said, "By the way, it says in her records it says it says a 3rd degree, but it's actually a 4th-stage wound, and your mom really needs to see a wound specialist." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, can you order that as the charge nurse?" And she said, I can't. It has to come from the facility and their doctor." And I said, "Okay." And that, my mom subsequently never saw a wound specialist for over 2 months and only saw one once. That was me bothering them every day about it. But, so in essence, she did reveal to me that, there was something that wasn't, being told to me and wasn't being handled properly. And also I'll say this about the nighttime charge nurse, who said to me the last hospital visit my mom had, said to me before I left, please don't bring your mom back here. We can't take care of her. We just can't. Meaning she, and she said, "You're a great daughter. And I hope my daughter doesn't have to go through what you went through with your mom." So, and held me in her arms. So she knew what was going on. And I think that, it's very difficult for the employees to play both sides. They have to be loyal to who's paying for their livelihood. So it puts everybody in a very difficult situation. They get retaliated on from, if not fired, and the family members get retaliated on. So, and it's a real issue. It is a very real issue because I'm actually a very nice person. I don't go in with all, guns blazing, even when there's a problem. But nevertheless, within, not days, I mean, I was like, I could feel the icicles when I would walk into the facility. Like I would say, hi, hello, how's everybody? And people would just ignore me. People wouldn't look at me. It felt so awful. And here I'm trying to just help my mom. And I'm being made out to be the enemy.
But it's also nice, at least from my perspective, to hear that some folks try to acknowledge that you were trying to be a good daughter. So,
Yes.
if anything, that was nice to hear.
That was a gift. Yeah, that was a gift. And it was a human moment. And that's all you're looking for is human beings, because that's what we're dealing with as human beings, right?
Yeah. So, I guess final question for me would be, and I know this might be a broad and tough question to ask or answer, I should say, but I'll give it a shot anyway. Is for the average Jane or Joe who may not have dealt with this kind of situation and are just here, you only hear snippets of things unless you deal with it directly like you have. How can a average Jane and Joe try to help correct the system as it lies?
Yeah, that it's a biggie. That's a biggie. And that's what we're trying to do. I mean, we are, as I said a little bit, I touched on it a little bit before, which is that it's really on us as a public, because there is a very strong nursing home lobby, and the lobby is motivated to keep everything status quo, and they have financial means to do so, and they make very large campaign contributions to our politicians. They have seats in the legislature in our legislation. And, so it is a difficult task, especially traditionally with traditional advocacy. So we're trying to mobilize a grassroots movement, much like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. We really need to take the power into our own hands as a public, and remind our politicians, remind the people that are paying our politicians this money, that this is a human rights issue, and that humans should not be used as widgets. And as a public, as constituents, that is our currency, is as a constituent. That is the only currency that we have that can, go up against real currency, dollars. But it's very powerful. Our voices are powerful, and we've seen it throughout history, right? We've seen changes that happen by the public. And so you can't let it overwhelm. It is overwhelming if you look at it in the macro, but we have to get down into the weeds and go, we have power. We always have had power throughout our history, and we can make a change. So we are mobilizing a movement called ROAR, and we want to roar for long-term care reform. And and you can go to our website, which is nocountryforoldpeople.com. There's a way to put your name on a list and be part of it. And I think it's so important that we do this. And we need the people, though. We need voices and people together. And we need help organizing this movement, because, I've never done a movement, but I know I'm there. I'm going to be there. And we have to really be loud about it, because it's been hidden for too long. And it's just the most tragic situation that's happening right under our own noses. Can I just give one statistic that'll blow everyone's? During COVID, and this just blows my mind, and so I like to share it. During COVID, Dr. Michael Wasserman, who's a very renowned gerontologist, and geriatrician, I should say, and also a very respected voice in long-term care reform. And he was saying in our documentary that within the first month and a half of COVID, over 200,000 long-term care residents died before their time, and not from COVID. They died from neglect, they died from isolation, and they died alone. That's a huge number to wrap your head around. And you could say they're old and they were going to die anyway, but like he says, that's a lie. That's just a lie to make us all feel okay about it. That's 200,000 human beings, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, children that died. And no one's talking about it. So we all need to get together and start talking about it.
Yeah. Where can folks see the documentary if they choose to?
Yes, please choose to. It's not out for the public yet. It's coming out in 25 or in the first part of 25. We're doing some private screenings in the meantime, and you can find out where they are on our website at, as I said, nocountryforoldpeople.com, because and it's probably going to end up from, I think we're going to do a 3-part docuseries with it because it is quite lengthy, but it's important because it's information that everyone's going to want to know. And it's a hard watch, but it's also, I don't think if you might agree with me that it doesn't end on, a horrible note. I think that it ends on a very positive, uplifting, hopeful note that we can make a change, and that we have and we will. And all experiences, even this tragedy with my mom, there's always some silver lining, and the silver lining is that maybe I can save someone else from having to go through this kind of pain. And if I do that, then that's good.
Absolutely.
That it's okay. Then I can feel a little bit better about it.
Susie Singer-Carter, thank you so much for the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs?